difficult.
Good evening and welcome to the City of Lebanon Plan Commission meeting for Monday, October 15th, 2018. I'd like to open the meeting by a roll call.
Okay. Matt Reynolds, absent. Ashley Paddock. Here. John Lastly.
Here.
Kevin Krulik.
Here.
Keith Campbell.
Here.
Gordon Perry.
Here.
Brian Tandy.
Here.
Jane Taylor.
Here.
And Lori Gross.
Here.
Great. Next item is the approval of the August 20th meeting minutes. I'll have a chance to review those. Questions? If not, I would entertain a motion.
Make a motion that we approve the August 20th minutes as printed.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Kelly, will you take, or all in favor?
Aye.
Great. All right. Next item is old business. Ben, I'm gonna hand this over to you to walk down through these docket items that have either been withdrawn or postponed for the evening. This evening.
Good deal. Good evening, Plan Commission members. We have 3 items of old business. Docket 18-34 and 18-35 are related to the Drake Estates project on John Bart Road. Staff has requested those items to be continued to the November meeting, so they'll not be heard tonight. We're still working through a number of items with the applicant before that's ready to go. So if anybody's here related to that item, that will be on the November meeting agenda. And then the primary plat for West Superior Street for Mr. Land, that has been withdrawn. We just discovered that the costs associated with developing that property were too significant in order to make it happen. So docket number, I guess it doesn't have the docket number, but the primary plat for West Superior Street has been withdrawn by the applicant. So that should cover all the old business items.
Great. So again, as Ben pointed out, the 2 docket items, 1834 and 1835 for the Lennar PUD development preliminary plan, that has been postponed until the November meeting. All right, on to new business. Docket number 1838. Ben, if you'll go ahead and lead us through this docket item number, please.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Docket 1838 is for Festool. This is a development plan approval for an expansion that will result in hopefully multiple expansions over the course of the next few years. They have acquired 23 acres to their west, directly adjacent to their existing facility to their west. This was annexed to the City of Lebanon earlier this year. And they have been before the Board of Zoning Appeals for a number of variances related to this project, just at a meeting earlier this year, a couple months ago, in fact. We'll pull up the site plan here to get an idea what we're talking about. This you see represented by this footprint is their existing facility on Enterprise Boulevard. And then what you can see here is the first 40,000 or approximately 40,000 square foot expansion, and they're showing footprints for additional expansions at future times as necessary based on business. So they said this is the first 40,000 square foot expansion. They're expanding their truck court to the north of the building, and then they're also adding some additional employee parking spaces to the south of the building you see represented here. As I mentioned, this went through a Board of Zoning Appeals approval for 8 different variances related to different site design standards. Because this site is actually in the overlay but not adjacent to the thoroughfare that's related to the overlay, there was a number associated with that. And then one item that we're still working out, I'll get to here in a second, related to sidewalks on 200 West. So just walking through some of the highlights of the development plan. As you can see here, it shows the expansion, as I've mentioned. The truck court will be expanded to the west. There is future possibility for additional truck and dock doors as they expand in the future expansions. I'll let the applicant walk through what they're actually intending to use this for. My understanding is a combination of assembly and warehousing distribution. They do intend to add some employees as part of this expansion, and will continue to add employees as they expand over time and add additional services to this facility. Going through the staff report as you walk through the development standards, certainly with the size of the property they more than meet any of our applicable site design standards for the zoning district. In terms of the parking, They're required 93 parking spaces overall based on the parking requirement for a warehousing, distribution, and light manufacturing facility, and they have more than double that. So they are a more employee-intensive use because they do have some office here as well. So they have more than enough parking for what our standards require. One thing I will highlight, we're still working with them to finalize their lighting plan. They have agreed to meet all applicable standards for lighting, but that hasn't been submitted at this point. So there's a condition on the approval that they submit an appropriate lighting plan. In terms of the landscape plan, let me pull that up real quick. Actually, I was in the right spot. Just need to get to the right page. And actually, we're working on the landscape plan a little bit right now, but I'll show the two areas where we're still working with them. And I thought it was right after that, but it's not. So the area to the northwest of the building, while zoned industrial, is currently a number of single-family residential homes, which requires a buffer yard adjacent to those. And so we're working with them to get an appropriate buffer yard added to the landscape plan, which they've actually submitted a new draft of that this afternoon. So that's already in the works. This would require a type D buffer yard on the north and west property lines adjacent to those homes. Based on the linear measurement of those property lines, it would equate to additional a total of 108 trees and 203 shrubs, which they've committed to providing along those property lines. And then let me at least get to an area where you can see where we're talking about. So it would be around their detention facility here to the north of the detention pond, and then this west property line that you see depicted right here. And as I said, they're already working on that draft, and I've got a draft to review at this time. The other place where we're still waiting on, where they're, oh, here we go, I just found it. How about that? There you can see they had proposed some tree plantings around the pond, and a more substantial buffer is required along there, which they're working on right now. So you can see that area. And then the second area is the new parking area to the south, which is on the next page here. And they're required to meet the parking lot perimeter landscape requirements on the south and west sides of this parking area, which they've agreed to do. That's a total of 13 trees and 42 shrubs. Again, they've already provided a draft that shows those plantings added. So we are very close to having a landscape plan that can be approved as well. In terms of signage, there's no new signage that's been proposed as part of this building expansion, so there wasn't anything necessarily there for the folks to review. In terms of architecture, let me pull that up for you. If you're familiar with their existing building, the expansion is going to look very familiar. As you can see here on the left-hand side of this elevation, this is the existing building. And then to the right-hand side is showing, I believe this section that you see right here represents this first phase expansion. This would be the second phase you see here. So again, they're copying the existing architecture of the existing building, which is very attractive for a warehousing structure, something that really fits in well in our business park. Staff recommendation, we've indicated we find this compliant with our UDO, subject to a couple of conditions. That the applicant adequately address any remaining TAC comments prior to application for any building permits. Stormwater approval, and I didn't get into this specifically, but we're still working with them on finalizing their stormwater and detention for the site. Kevin can probably explain much better where we're at in terms of that discussion, but we certainly want to make sure that all their drainage gets approved before they apply for any building permits, which it sounds like they're going to be on the stormwater board in a couple of weeks. The applicant, number 3, the applicant submit a lighting plan for approval by planning staff that meets all applicable UDO standards. And finally, the landscape plan. Applicant submits a revised landscape plan for approval for planning staff that addresses the required buffer yard and perimeter parking lot plantings. So that is a very quick overview of the expansion plan for Festool, and I'll be happy to answer any questions anybody has.
Then the stormwater plan, is that just a city thing, or does that have to also be approved by the county?
In this case, Kevin, does this go to the county also? I can't remember if this outlets to a legal drain or not.
It's indirectly outlets to a legal drain.
Okay.
I don't believe it has to go to county drainage board. I think it's all just our board of works. And I believe we we have the applicant through their engineering consultant has met all the requirements. I do need to check in with our consultant, Christopher Burke Engineers. Some of these calculations have been going back and forth over the last 48 hours, definitely the last week, and I just need to make sure that they've received everything they need in order to recommend release of the project. I believe we are, but I just need to check in with them, and any action we would take tonight ought to be contingent on that, and that'll be just something staff will follow up and make sure we're prepared to release the permits before.
But we don't need to make any revisions to the staff recommendations?
I don't think so, as long as they receive all the appropriate storm models approvals.
Okay.
The Board of Works should be the only approval the formal approval they need.
Great. Any questions for Ben?
Yeah, Ben, did you say also that they are still working on the landscaping behind where the houses go, or where the houses are sitting now?
Yes, I did just get a draft right before we came here, but so that northern property line, and then that western property line where they're adjacent to the existing homes, there will be a 25-foot buffer along both of those property lines, and there's going to be, and again, I've already seen the draft of this, 108 trees and 203 shrubs in order to meet that type D buffer requirements. So those will be planted along the perimeter, and it's a very substantial buffer for those homes.
Other questions for Ben? If not, if we could hear from the applicant about any other details that Ben might have overseen. Probably not likely, but.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for having us tonight. My name is Chris Hammerly. I'm General Counsel for Festool. And as Ben said, this is before you tonight is the planned expansion of a 40,000 square foot warehouse, which will also include some light manufacturing as well. This is Festool's second expansion, I believe, in the last 10 years. So they're very happy to be moving in that direction and expanding within the community. They voluntarily annexed the property a few months ago, and it has been zoned PBI in order to fit within that qualification. For those of you who aren't familiar with what Festool is or what they do, they're a German power tool manufacturer. They invented the first portable chainsaw in the 20s, and they've just expanded throughout Europe. And we are here in Lebanon, the North American headquarters. They've recently acquired a company called SawStop, which those familiar with how saws work, they can be very dangerous. And this is a device that if your skin comes in contact with the blade, it immediately retracts and stops it from injuring an individual. So they're very excited about that purchase. That may be part of the development down the road as far as bringing some of the corporate offices here as well. That's located out in Portland at this time. But the next expansion, as Ben pointed out, is an additional 40,000 square foot. It's all consistent with the design features, the materials of the building. If any of you have been out there, they're very proud of the way the building looks. We think it's one of the better looking buildings in the business park, if not in Boone County in general. But the design will be consistent with that. And I know that Mr. Nizwicki is here this evening, and Mr. Haschel as well, that can speak to any of the specifics on the design. I know we talked about landscaping a little bit, so if you want to hear some more about that, I'd be happy to turn it over to them.
Questions for the applicant? Other members? Okay. Well, I appreciate it.
Thank you.
This is a public hearing, so if anyone would like to speak on this docket or a Festool expansion, as long as you've signed in and take your time at the podium. Seeing how there isn't a mad rush for the podium, I'll close the public portion of the meeting and again ask the Plan Commission if there are any additional questions for Ben or for the applicant. Barring none, looking for a motion for this docket number.
I'll make a motion to approve the subject development plan contingent on the following conditions. The applicant adequately addresses any remaining City of Lebanon Technical Advisory Committee comments prior to application for any building permits or site improvements. Contingent on stormwater approval, the lighting plan, and the landscape plan.
Okay, we have a motion,
Second that.
and we have a second. Shall we take the roll?
Ashley?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Kevin Kurlik?
Yes.
Keith Campbell?
Yes.
Gordon Perry?
Yes.
Brian Tandy?
Yes.
Jane Taylor?
Yes.
Lori Gross.
Yes.
Great. Docket number is approved. We wish you best of luck with your expansion plans.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We encourage all of you to stop in if you have time, if you haven't been in. It's our facility.
I had thought you guys were going to bring back a live example of that safe stop when you came back.
It's on YouTube, and they have to up my pay in order to demonstrate. I'll run the stall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, next up is docket number 1839 and 1840. Landworks Engineering LLC. Ben, I'll let you take it from here.
Very good. There are two steps to this plan that's before you tonight. There would be the primary plat is one, and then the second would be the development plan. Let me pull up. That's not what I was looking for. I think that's the one I want. For those that are not familiar with this, you will see here, this is on South Lebanon Street on the west side of the road, just north of Jerry Alexander's real estate office building. It is right now a 7-acre piece of property that I think has got 4 homes and a couple of barns on it that are quite overgrown, falling apart, and all that good stuff that comes with it. So we're pretty excited to have this project before you tonight to make some significant improvements to this site. Let me get out my staff report here. We can walk through some of the details. As I said, there'll be 2 motions that we'll need from you tonight. One will be the primary plat, and I will pull that up here in a second so you can see the details of the plat itself. This is a 2-lot development, with one of the lots being developed currently, and the other one will be made available for additional development in the future. Let me pull up the plat. It's down here a little ways. Got to get through all the details of the development plan first before you can see that. Here we go. Yeah. So what you see here is the 2 lots. This is South Lebanon Street on the right-hand side of this plan. The first lot will be it's about 3.5 to 4 acres that you see here on adjacent to Lebanon Street. They will provide an access easement, and then the back about almost 4 acres will be available for additional development. They'll obviously be clearing out all of the vacant homes that are falling apart and clearing a lot of the overgrowth and trees, et cetera, and we'll be developing this front for a medical office building, about 20,000 square foot medical office building. So there'll be 2 phases. One will be to approve this primary plat, this 2-lot primary plat and all the easements associated with it, and the second will be the development plan for the medical office building. And we will go back and take a look at that now. All right, here's the site plan for that. As I mentioned, this is about a 20,000 square foot single-story medical office building that you see depicted here. It has one drive cut off of Lebanon Street that is directly across the street from a public access on the east side of the road. They do have all of their customer parking out front of the building and then employee parking to the rear of the building you see here. They have been before the Board of Zoning Appeals at the last meeting here in October and received 3 development standards variances, one related to building height, one related to corridor buffer, and one related to facade offset, so an architectural standard. Let me walk through some of the highlights of the staff report. In terms of the UDO development standards for, in this case, the Planned Business Commercial Zoning District, I see here there's a typo in my staff report, is the Planned Business Commercial Zoning District. They obviously meet all of the applicable zoning standards that you see here. In terms of the parking requirements, based on their floor plan, they have The parking requirement is based on the number of exam rooms. We require 3 parking spaces per exam room. The total that required is 84, and they currently are showing 104 spaces, so they meet our parking requirement. In terms of the lighting plan, there are a couple of, actually, I won't pull up the lighting plan because you won't be able to read any of the measurements, but right adjacent to the access drive off of Lebanon Street, a couple of the foot candle measurements are a little high for our standards, so we've mentioned that to them, and they will be making those adjustments as needed. And we'll get something back to us that meets all the applicable standards for lighting. So there is something they're working out as far as the lighting. In terms of the landscaping, let me go find that. They always put the landscape plan. Oh, I guess this landscape plan's towards the front here. Usually it's one of the last pages. This will give you an idea of the landscape plan. They showed significant landscaping here. They had some variance for buffer yards across the front, but there's still significant landscaping proposed. They meet all the applicable parking lot perimeter landscaping requirements you can see here, as well as the building-based landscaping requirements. We've got a very attractive landscape plan. We are still working out some details based on the landscaping for them. They may actually end up returning to the BZA one more time and make a few adjustments here, but what you see here is what's being proposed right now. Anything different than that's got to go back to the BZA. So we are still working to see if there's anything additional needed, but right now this is the landscape plan that's being proposed, and it meets all the applicable standards other than some minor revisions according to the buffer yard. So this will provide a very appropriate landscape plan. In terms of the site itself, you can see here they've got this main drive that comes in that will provide access to this parking area, and in the future would also provide access to that second lot that's to the west. Right now this is a fire access drive only, so it will be signed appropriately because it's not wide enough to meet two-way vehicle requirements, so this will be signed as fire access only. So the access to the site will come in through the customer parking area here and then around the south side of the building to the employee parking in the back. But again, like I said, all the customer parking is out front, so it's the most convenient to the front of the building. Signage plan, the signage has not been proposed at this time. They're still working out some details with their tenant. So they will be submitting a signage plan to our office once they have those details worked out on what the tenant wants in terms of signage. And they have agreed that it will meet all of our applicable standards for signage. So once they get those sign requirements worked out with their tenant, they'll be submitting that. In terms of architecture, I mentioned that they had one variance based on a facade offset requirement. Otherwise, they meet all other applicable standards for the overlay district, which you see represented here. And it's probably so small you can't see much of it. Let's zoom in a little bit here so you can at least see what the front of the building. It is a brick building with some variations in design. There is a canopied entrance in the front here. This gives you a little bit of an idea what that front of that building is going to look like. So that's the real quick highlights. I'll let them go through and talk a little bit more about their tenant and when they're hoping to get this going. In terms of staff recommendation, we've indicated that this site, we find compliance with the UDO for the subject site. We recommend approval of the primary plat and development plan contingent on the following conditions. The first being adequately addressing any remaining TAC comments, if there are any. Second being that they receive formal drainage approval from the City of Lebanon Board of Works prior to building permits. The third being that they work with staff to revise the lighting photometric plan to meet the applicable UDO lighting standards. And finally, the signage plan, that they submit a signage plan to staff that meets all applicable UDO standards at such time that signage needs are known. And I would be happy to answer any questions on this side as well.
Ben, the access that you talk about on State Road 32, has that all been cleared with NDOT?
There are existing cuts there, and I can't remember if this is it. I'll let them walk through with if this is exactly where there's an existing cut, but they will have to work through NDOT to make sure all is approved if it's in a different location than what's there now.
Does that need to be a staff recommendation?
We can certainly add that.
State Road 39.
Yeah, State Road 39, yeah.
That is incorporated into the technical comments that they have to provide permit documentation for.
And we can certainly add that as a condition additionally if we want to highlight that as well.
Okay, on the north side, the fire lane that you showed?
Yes.
That's adequate for that temporary setup, and then if they want to make that a true access easement to the lot to the west, there's room to make that the full width and curbs and all that kind of stuff?
Yes, yeah, they will meet all standards at such time that becomes full access to that lot to the west.
And there currently is not a signage plan? That would have to go, if
There is not a sign plan, because they just haven't worked out the details with their tenant on exactly what the sign information needs to be.
and our standards dictate size, shape, all,
Yes.
square footage, and if they're going to do something different, that would have to go back to the BZA, correct?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. Other questions for Ben?
The only question I have is how far to the north is that going?
How far to the north?
Is it going up to Dollar General?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
This incorporates all of the property
All
that
three
was
of those
available.
houses, all four of them?
Yes, yeah, they'll all be going
And
away.
my other question is, when's that going to start to happen?
My understanding is still before the end of the year.
Oh, good, okay.
Yeah, they're supposed to close on the property within the next couple of weeks, and I think you'll start seeing some site work happening very soon thereafter.
Ben, on the zoning plan that you have on the screen right now, the lower left corner, the southeast corner of the property, there's some type of black line there. That's not an out parcel, is it?
Let me go back.
Oh, it's-
I
I'm
accidentally
sorry, I'm
closed
looking
that.
at what, I'm looking
On
at
the,
what
on
was
the
in the
site
packet.
plan, you said?
Well, on the plat that you showed, it did not show an out, it did not show an outlot, but on the cover sheet, what talks about the project site, the very front page, the vicinity map shows an out.
That's an existing parcel that will be incorporated, and it's those parcel lines will disappear.
Okay, so that's not an out try, all of it's going?
Correct.
All of it's going to be platted? Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
One correction, I think, to Keith's comment, this doesn't go all the way up to the Dollar General,
Up to the
like to the
parking lot.
driveway
That's
or
what
the
I meant.
parking lot. There is some vacant land south of there. I think there used to be a trailer park that sat there,
There
if
did.
memory serves me
There
correctly.
was.
So this is the wooded parcel just south of where that trailer park used to sit.
Do we
So,
still have one
looking
vacant,
there,
there's still be
it
one?
starts about right here where the starts. The entrance to this lines up directly across from Cox Avenue.
Right.
Other questions for Ben? Barring none, we can hear from the applicant. Invite the applicant to come forward.
Thank you. Good evening. Joe Calderon, attorney with Barnes & Thornburg, 11 South Meridian, Indianapolis. We have members of our entire team tonight, including representatives of the ownership, architect, and our civil. I think Ben did a very nice job describing what we're intending to seek approval of tonight. Just for your benefit, the building that is being proposed is on Lot 2 versus Lot 1. It's about a 20,000 square foot building, so it'll be a pretty significant building and a great redevelopment project. The tenant has been identified, but I'll let a client describe that to you if you have any questions. That's why there's no sign plan, because the building will be operated by a single tenant. It'll be up to them for their trade dress and things like that. So we'll address that with the supplemental filing. The project came before the BZA a couple of weeks ago with a couple of development standard variances. They were passed unanimously. The project, the real estate closing scheduled for first part of November, with construction anticipated in the spring. So this project should get going pretty quickly, and we hope that you find it to be appropriate for the overlay in that area. We are absolutely fine with all of the conditions in the staff report, and again, we have members of the team to answer any specific questions in case you have any questions regarding architectural or civil items. But from an overview perspective, hopefully we've given you enough to make a positive motion tonight.
Questions for the applicant or the team, the ownership team?
Yeah, I got a question. On the southwest side, it says there's a community room, and it just looks architecturally, there's only one skinny window for that entire big room.
My name's Tyson Chastain. I appreciate you all having me here, and I appreciate your question. So I'll be the owner of the asset that's 20,000 square feet. We're in the business of healthcare real estate, and as healthcare reforms, and definitely as Lebanon reforms, we just heard a gentleman talk about job growth here today. One of the transitioning parts of healthcare in the primary care sector is getting older patients or patients that don't have access to education, et cetera, to these facilities. So the community room is proposed to be for educational services, food services, et cetera, for the population of Lebanon and or newer people coming to town. So that's what it's addressed for. As this model evolves, we know a little bit more timing, et cetera. We'll have more information on what they're going to do with that. But it will effectively be like a room like this that will be wide open with chairs and tables in it that they can talk to people about.
I just wondered if it'd be more pleasing from the inside and out if it had a few more windows in that large room.
We, of course, obviously we love windows,
right,
like everybody does. The tenants picked that. So I'll take that back to them and make sure they're aware that, you know, if the question was brought up, and see what they want to do with it.
Okay, good.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Other questions from the commission to the applicant or the team? Okay. At this time, I would open up the public hearing for this docket number 1839 and 1840 with regards to Landworks engineering. If you care to speak, as long as you're signed in, hear your comments at the podium. Seeing as how we don't have anybody stepping forward, I'll close the public portion of the meeting and again ask the commission if there are any questions for Ben or the applicant.
I don't have any questions. I just think it'll be a great asset right there at that area that's been so tore down and wore down for so many years.
A great addition to the city. Okay, barring any additional questions, we would entertain a motion on this docket. Ben, do we do this, both of these, or how do you?
I would recommend a separate motion for the primary plat and for the development plan.
Okay, so we'll put, entertaining a motion for the preliminary plat, which would be 1839, correct, Ben?
Yes, I believe so. Actually, it looks like 1840 is the primary plat.
Okay, 1840 for the primary,
Yeah,
or approval of the primary plat, excuse me.
Will 1 through 4 need to be noted for both the plat
Yes.
and the development plan?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion to approve the primary plat contingent on the following conditions. The TAC comments, the applicant adequately addresses any remaining City of Lebanon Technical Advisory Committee comments prior to application for any building permits or site improvements, stormwater approval, lighting plan, and a signage plan.
We have a
I'll second.
motion and a second. Kelly, will you take roll?
Ashley Paddock,
Yes.
John Lastly,
Yes.
Kevin Kurlik,
Aye.
Keith Campbell,
Yes.
Gordon Perry,
Aye.
Brian Tandy,
Yes.
Jane Taylor,
Yes.
and Lori Gross.
Yes.
Right. Docket number 1840, the primary plat is approved. I would entertain a motion for the development plan, docket number 1839.
I'll make a motion to approve docket 18-39, which is the development plan for the AHN at, contingent on the TAC comments the stormwater approval, lighting plan approval, and a signage plan approval.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Motion and a second, Kelly, will you take the roll?
Ashley Paddock,
Yes.
John Leslie,
Yes.
Kevin Krulik, Keith Campbell,
Yes.
Gordon Perry,
Yes,
Brian Tandy,
Yes.
Jane Taylor,
Yes.
and Lori Gross.
Yes.
great. Docket number 1840, the development plans pass. 1839, I'm sorry. Great. All right, Ben,
Thank you.
thank you for your time this evening. Ben, if you'd like to lead us into the next docket, number 18.
All right. The next four items all came in one single annexation petition, but we separated them out because they weren't all contiguous to each other. So it looks like there's a whole lot going on here, but it's more just because the properties are in different areas, but they're all somewhat related and have been submitted by the same local broker. I will point out for anyone here that's interested in hearing about these, there is not a proposal for development on any of these parcels yet. And I'm not aware that there's anything on the horizon necessarily. This is more a marketing tool for anyone who might be interested in developing these sites, that the annexation process was already complete. So this is a 60 to 90 day step that's already done. So if somebody's coming in and wants to consider these sites for development, that step is already done and they're just coming in for the planning approvals. So excuse me, just to reiterate, there is not a development that's proposed for these sites right now. So the first one, excuse me, is about 23.5 acres. It's on Witt Road that you see depicted here, just north of our existing city limits. This is actually in proximity to the Sunbrook development that you're all familiar with out there at Witt and 250 North. So there's two separate properties on either side of Witt Road that has requested annexation. And I'll walk through. So the process is, the annexation is a council process. But just as a reminder, I know we've done a few of these in the last year and a half. It's required to come to the Plan Commission first for a recommendation on zoning to the council. So it's up to the Plan Commission to decide based on the comprehensive plan and based on existing zoning in the area, what's the most appropriate zoning. The process typically would suggest if there's not a development proposed, you identify the property as the SF, single family residential zoning classification. As we get to some of the ones later, I made a couple of different recommendations based on what's going on in the area. But in this case, let me pull out my staff report to make sure I don't miss anything. We have recommended, staff has recommended the single-family residential SF zoning classification for this property, which is our lowest densities residential zoning classification. So what that means is if anybody does propose anything for the site, they'll either have to meet those residential zoning standards or come back into the Plan Commission for some either zoning change or plan unit development or something like that. So if and or when there is a development proposed for the site, it will come back to the Plan Commission and we'll have a public hearing associated with it. But for now, because there is no development proposed and it's in an area that's all primarily residential and primarily lower density as you go to the north, staff's recommended the SF single-family residential zoning classification for this property.
Questions for Ben? Okay, I will open up the public hearing portion for this docket number. Anyone wishing to speak on this annexation, please sign in and step forward. Seeing as how no one's coming forward, I'll close the public portion of the meeting and again ask the commission if there are any questions for Ben on this. Seeing how we have no further questions for Ben, I'm looking for a motion to recommend this be moved, or recommendation, looking for a motion for recommendation to pass along to the city council.
I'll make a motion to pass along a favorable recommendation for the voluntary annexation and the SF zoning classification.
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion and a second. Kelly?
Ashley Paddock,
Yes.
JohnLashley.
Yes.
Hey, if I may, Commission, so Ben, just for clarification, because you're seeking approval or a motion for each of these separately, is that correct?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do them separately since they're not contiguous.
Okay, so we'll do, the first one is docket 18-41, is that accurate?
Yeah.
I just buried my agenda.
It's 1841.
Yes, yeah, this is for docket 1841.
We can redo that. We need to redo that.
Okay, we'll start the roll process again, Kelly?
Okay. Ashley Paddock.
Yes.
John Leslie.
Yes.
Kevin Kurlik.
Yes.
Keith Campbell.
Yes.
Gordon Perry.
Yes.
Brian Tandy.
Yes.
Jane Taylor.
Yes.
Lori Gross.
Yes.
Docket number 1841, a favorable recommendation will be made, forwarded to the City Council. All right, docket number 1842, Ben, can you
All
say
right.
anything?
1842 is a portion of the SLH Farms property. This is just north of existing city limits on 300 North, and this is, I believe it's 25 East right here, if I'm not mistaken. Directly to the south is the property owned by the hospital. My understanding from the broker is the intention over time is to annex this entire SLH Farms property here, but they weren't contiguous enough to take the whole property at first. So they're starting with this 6-acre piece. Again, going back to the comprehensive plan, it recommends residential for this area. And this is a low-density area as well, especially north of 300 North in this area. We anticipate it to be more of a residential, lower-density, single-family. And again, there is not a development proposed right now for this property, so we're recommending the SF, single-family residential zoning classification for this property.
Okay. All right, I'll open up public hearing portion of the meeting for anyone that wishes to speak on this annexation. Sign in and step forward to the podium. I'll close the public portion of the meeting and ask the commission if there are any other questions for Ben on docket number 1842. If not, I would entertain a motion for a recommendation to the City Council.
I'll make a motion for docket 18-42 for a favorable recommendation to the council, the zoning classification SF.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Kelly, would you take the roll?
Ashley Paddock.
Yes.
John Leslie.
Yes.
Kevin Kurlik.
Yes.
Keith Campbell.
Yes.
Gordon Perry.
Yes.
Brian Tandy.
Yes.
Jane Taylor.
Yes.
Lori Gross.
Yes.
Great. Docket number 1842, forward a favorable recommendation to the City Council. Okay, Ben, next is 1843.
All right, 1843. This one's a little bit more unique than all the rest of them. While it's still agricultural ground, this site includes some of the property owned by the hospital, and they submitted their petition requesting specific zoning that is unique of the single-family SF zoning classification. So just to get your bearings on where we're talking about, we are on both sides of 300 North. The hospital's property is to the south here. It's about 90 or so acres. And then there's some additional property owned by Jackson's to the north. As you can see here, what they requested is that the far western parcel, they requested a PBC, Planned Business Commercial Zoning Classification. And then they requested SF2, Single Family Residential Zoning Classification for the remainder of this piece here. And then the Jacksons did not make a request, so because there's not a development plan, we suggested the single-family residential SF. I understand this is a little bit different than what than the process that's set up. As we looked at it, however, what they've requested is in keeping with the comprehensive plan. As you look at the zoning in the area, and I don't have the map here, to the east is Auburn Meadows. That is also zoned SF2. To the south is actually an old PUD that is a higher density as well. So while there isn't a development plan proposed, the request for SF2 is consistent with the zoning that's adjacent to them. And again, before anything were to develop on this site, it would have to come back to the Plan Commission and possibly the council for approval. And kind of looking at the overall plan for this area, the comprehensive plan suggesting these, staff found this to be in keeping and consistent with the comprehensive plan. While it is a little bit different than the SF zoning classification, the SF2 is still residential and it's consistent with the zoning in the area. So what we have recommended, and I'd be happy we can discuss this a little bit more, what the comfort level is for the Plan Commission, is this western parcel, which is really adjacent to the commercial properties associated with the hospital. I think they do have some more non-residential plans for this area. We've recommended PBC. This is consistent with the comprehensive plan. The remainder of this property, we have recommended the SF2 zoning classification, again, consistent with the comprehensive plan and with the surrounding zonings of the property. As you get north of 300, though, we have just recommended the standard SF, single-family residential zoning classification.
Questions for Ben? I have one, Ben. So the difference between SF and SF2, is that lot sizing or?
Yeah, it's I think SF is, I think maybe I'll just answer that question generally because I don't remember the SF standards. SF2 is a smaller lot size.
Okay.
And
then,
I believe it's 9,000 square foot lots.
Okay.
Is what SF2
And then the
requires.
PBC portion, I'm assuming that would be like doctor's offices or medical?
Yeah, it's going to be something consistent with what they're already developing on their site, something related to the hospital.
The property to the west of that green area that you were showing, that's part of their property already?
Yes, yeah, it's part that they already own that's zoned PBC.
Okay. Other questions for Ben? All right, hearing none, I will open up the public portion of this meeting for anyone that wishes to speak about this particular docket number 1843. Sign in and step forward to the podium. So we have no one stepping forward. I'll close the meeting and ask one more time if there are any questions for Ben. If not, entertain a, well, I've got to close, I'm sorry, I'm closing the public hearing portion of the meeting. Any other questions for Ben? Seeing as how there's none, I would entertain a motion for a recommendation to the City Council for this annexation, docket number 1843.
I'll make a motion to move forward the recommendation of docket number 1843 with the recommendations that are
Favorable.
listed in the staff plan. Do I have to list all of the PBC, the SF2 and the SF? Do I have to do all that, Ben?
I don't think you have to. I think if you just reference with the recommendation, I think that's fine.
Yep, with the recommendation, zoning classifications for the common council, as listed in the staff planning. Is that good enough?
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second the motion.
We have a second. Kelly?
Ashley Paddock,
Yes.
John Leslie,
Yes.
Kevin Krulik.
Yes.
Keith Campbell,
Yes,
Gordon Perry,
Yes.
Brian Tandy,
Yes.
Jane Taylor,
Yes.
Lori Gross.
Yes.
Great. Docket number 1843 receives a favorable recommendation to the City Council. All right, the last docket number 1844. Ben, one more time.
Right, last but not least, we have a series of properties that the hospital has acquired along Lebanon Street, just north of their existing entrance, that you see represented on the site map that I'm sure they'll be putting up in a second. Some of them, actually, I think now that they are all listed as either Indiana Health Association or Board of Trustees of the hospital. So they've acquired all these properties. Again, they haven't provided us any sort of proposal on what they're planning for this area yet, but they do own the property that's directly adjacent to the east and behind this. So they're just, I believe, we have not seen it. I know they're working on a master plan for this entire property, so I'm assuming that they have some plans for what they're planning for this area, but there is no plan currently. But they are looking to incorporate into the overall campus for the hospital, and getting this annex is the first step in that scenario. They have requested the PBC zoning for this property, which is consistent with both the surrounding zoning for the hospital, et cetera, on the east side of the property, and it is also consistent with the comprehensive plan for the city for this area. So again, while there isn't a concept proposed for the site, the zoning that they've requested and that we've recommended is consistent with all of our planning documents and with the adjacent property zoning. So in this case, staff has recommended the planned business commercial PBC zoning classification to the Common Council for this proposed annex territory.
Ben, questions for Ben? Board, I guess, maybe? All right. Barring any questions, I will open up the public portion of the meeting for anyone that wishes to speak on this docket number 1844, the annexation to the city. Please sign in, step forward to the podium. Seeing that there are nobody coming forward, I'll close the public portion of the meeting and ask the commission one last time if there are any questions for Ben. Hearing none, I would entertain a motion for a recommendation to the city council.
I'll make a motion to make a favor on docket 18-44 for favorable recommendation for zoning classification of PBC to the council.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Kelly?
Ashley Paddock,
Yes.
John Leslie,
Yep.
Kevin Krulik,
Yes.
Keith Campbell,
Yes.
Brian Tandy,
Yes.
Jane Taylor,
Yes.
Lori Gross.
Yes.
Yes.
Did I not say your name?
No.
I'm sorry, Gordon Perry.
Yes. Okay, great. Docket 1844 will receive a favorable recommendation to pass along to the city council. And that, any other business? We've gone through all of our docket items. I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, and we will look forward to seeing you next month, November 19th at 7 o'clock. Thank you.